Every year, Hollywood tries to adopt the real stories of people's lives in the form of biographical and drama films and series and movies. Every year, a lot of effort is made to make all these events, which a little while ago were only on the headlines of newspapers and the press, enter the entertainment industry. But still many of these stories are left behind. In this video, I want to tell 3 strange and incredible stories that you will probably rarely see in cinema and television. Before I start telling the stories, please don't forget to put your finger on the subscribe button to fill me up with full of energy, because I'm alone in editing videos, editing voice, editing the thumbnails, finding content, SEO of YouTube and uploading the videos. I'm totally alone. Let's start the story. A 27-year-old Texas man named George Pickering suffered a severe concussion in January 2015. This young man was immediately transferred to Tomball Medical Center to receive special care. According to Washington Post, his condition was assessed as critical and resuscitation devices were also connected to him. Doctors soon realized that there was nothing more they could do for this unfortunate man. So they had bad news for George's family. George, still attached to the machine, and was brain dead. George's family was informed that he had passed away and that there was no reason to continue using resuscitation devices. George's family was very sad to hear this news. The father of the family was so upset by this situation that he could not even hear the bad news and left the hospital in a hurry. In his absence, George's family, George's mother and brother, talked to the doctors and were gradually convinced to remove the devices from him after this stage, give the doctors the green light to donate his organs. After returning to the hospital and learning about this, George's father was furious. He still couldn't believe that his son was brain dead and there was no hope left for the young son to survive. The father insisted that George would be better off continuing his vegetative life as he was, so that he might come back to life. At this point, George's mother and brother told him that they had spoken to treating doctors and that there was no reason to delay the operation. George's father, who had almost gone mad after hearing these words, shouted at the doctors in a fit of rage, saying that they had better wait a little longer. However, doctors and other medical staff at the hospital tried to calm him down, telling him that a delay in turning off the machines could endanger the lives of other patients who need George's organs. The angry father, who didn't pay any attention to these words, ran to the room where his son was lying on the bed and, while holding his son in his arms in grief, desperately wished for his vital signs to return so that he wouldn't have to turn on the machines. Unfortunately, George was still showing no vital signs. Meanwhile, the medical staff entered the room and began to disconnect the support equipment. George's father, already completely unconscious, ran out of the hospital, got into his car, and returned with a gun. Now, with a gun, he told the treatment staff that it is better for them all to leave his son's room so as not to kill anyone. The doctors, who had not yet succeeded in completely shutting down the devices, left the room in panic. The father locked the door of the room, went to his son, and stood over him in the same way. For several hours, he was aiming the gun at the door of the room so that no one would enter. Meanwhile, the father kept an eye on his son and prayed for his vital signs to return. After several hours, The hospital authorities decided to call the police for help to control the situation. Police officers rushed to the room after a warning. Meanwhile, George's father held his son's hand for the last time and prepared to leave him with tears in his eyes. But miraculously, he realized that George was squeezing his hand. Unbelievable. George's father immediately surrendered to the police and put down his gun. As the officers were handcuffing him, he happily shouted that his son was back to the life and they should recheck his symptoms. Doctors did not believe George's father's words at first, but as they approached the bed, they realized that he was really awake. George's father was later sentenced to 10 months in prison for assault with a firearm, but he was able to save his son from certain death with all his stubbornness. Definitely, if he didn't buy a few hours for his son, this boy would not survive. Now, how is your feeling right now? Let's start the next story because it is very sad. Although several hypotheses have been proposed about the mystery of the boy in the cartoon over the past 60 years, his story remains an unsolved mystery. According to All That's Interesting website, in Ivy Hill Cemetery in Cedar Brook, Philadelphia, a pile of stuffed animals can be seen next to the one of the graves. These dolls were donated by families and visitors. On the tombstone, this phrase is also engraved: anonymous American child. As this boy was found nameless, he was also buried nameless and anonymous. Until today, no one knows his identity. The case of a boy in a cardboard box has now become a true horror story and one of the most famous serial killer mystery stories in the state of Philadelphia. In February 1957, a waterfowl hunter went near a park in North Philadelphia to check his steps. Meanwhile, a small cartoon on the floor caught his attention. The young man found the naked body of a boy inside the box, which was wrapped in a checkered blanket. The young hunter, who did not have a hunting license, was afraid that the police would confiscate his traps, so he resumed his hunt regardless of the body. A few days later, a student driving nearby came across a rabbit running along the side of the highway. The student, who knew that many traps were set in that place, stopped to make sure that the animal was safe, and his eyes fell on the cartoon. Although he too was afraid to inform the police, he finally decided to report the discovery of the body. Considering the boy's age, which was estimated between 3 and 7 years, the police hoped to quickly identify him. But soon all their hopes were dashed. Many of those who were looking for their missing person had lost a completely healthy, cheerful, and good-natured boy. But the boy who was found was extremely thin, dirty, and severely malnourished, and did not match the profile of any missing boy. His hair was disheveled and looked like it had been recently cut, because a bunch of his hair was still attached to his body. His extremely thin body showed that he was severely malnourished, and his body showed signs of surgical wounds, especially on his ankles, groin, and chin. The police fingerprinted this unknown boy in hopes of discovering his identity, but unfortunately he could not find a trace of him in the government archives. Over the next few years, more than 400,000 advertisements were printed and distributed throughout the Philadelphia area, as well as some cities in Pennsylvania. The coroner reconstructed his face, and painting of his face was placed on all advertisements. These ads were placed in all police stations, post offices, and even on gasoline bill envelopes. But again, no one could identify him. The scene of the crime or the place where the boy's body was found was searched again and again, but except for a few pieces of the boy's clothes, no other clues were found. However, the story of a boy in a cardboard box has turned into a cold case, but the commotion surrounding it has caused incredible interest of amateur detectives, and for this reason, several hypotheses about the true identity of this unknown boy have been proposed. A fortune teller in 1960 told a coroner's office employee that the boy in the cartoon actually came from a local orphanage. After their investigations, the police were able to find blankets similar to the one in which the boy's body was wrapped, as well as the pelvis that the cartoon originally belonged to. According to the theory of this employee of the Forensic Inspection Department, this boy was the daughter of the owner of the Center for Homeless Children, and his death was accidental. Of course, despite this employee's insistence that this story is true, no connection was found between the boy and the Center for Homeless Children. More than 40 years had to pass before another hypothesis about the boy in the cartoon was found. A woman referred to in the documents as Martha made a claim in 2002. According to Martha, this boy named Janet was bought by his cruel mother from his poor parents and was abused at home for a long time, about 2.5 years. At first, the police tried to find clues to this hypothesis, because they had previously discovered the remains of cooked beans in the boy's stomach, and it seemed that his fingers were wrinkled, and this is a sign of going to bathroom. Both of these clues had never been made public, and so Martha apparently had actual knowledge of the story. Martha's description of the boy, whom she described as a child with long hair, also matched other police findings. Martha's hypothesis was consistent with the facts that the boy's hair had been cut sometime before his death, as well as the testimony of a man who claimed to have seen a boy placed in a cardboard box near the woods. Despite all these clues, unfortunately the police eventually abandoned this hypothesis after being unable to confirm Martha's claims. In fact, the police did a background check on Martha and found out that she had a history of severe mental illness. Also, when the police questioned Martha's neighbors and friends, they all said that they had never seen a child in her house. Finally, this hypothesis was completely rejected. Several other theories were presented over the following years, and even in 2017, the boy's DNA sample was matched to family members who were believed to be his real family, but still there was no progress in his case. Having said that, it seems that the mystery of the boy in the cartoon will never be solved, and the sad story of nameless boy will remain as a mystery forever. You think the previous story was sad? But let's listen to the next story. The story of Johnny Gosch's disappearance is one of the most strangest and most mysterious unsolved mysteries in the world. The mysterious disappearance of a child is usually very sad and terrifying, but what distinguishes Johnny's story from other similar events is the events that continued for years after that story. Johnny Gosch was a 12-year-old boy who lived in a quiet neighborhood in the Iowa, and on the morning of September 5th, 1982, this boy was mysteriously disappeared. Neighbors last saw Johnny in a car with a Nebraska license plate and talking to a strong man. The police department started its investigation to find Johnny with a considerable delay, and this also angered his mother. The initial guess of the police officers was that Johnny had been kidnapped, although they had not found any clear reason and motive for this kidnapping. Noreen, Johnny's mother mistrusted her local police force and hired a private detective to find her son as soon as possible. The story of the missing life turned into a fledged media controversy. Johnny was the only missed person whose photo was printed on milk cartons and spread across the country. Despite extensive media coverage and police efforts, the traces of the life were found, but the controversy of this incident was on everyone's lips for years. Sometimes contradictory news was heard. One of the news was that several people claimed to have seen Johnny in a situation where two men were dragging him and Johnny shouted at a woman for help. The second strange event dates back to 1997, the day that I was born. Johnny's mother, Noreen, claimed that her son came to her door with a strange man that year. According to Noreen's claim, her son was 27 years old, the same age as I, and at that time, but by showing a birthmark of his mother, he was able to prove that he is the missing soul. According to Noreen, John seemed to be scared of the man with him and left after in a 1.5 hour conversation. In the early 80s, when Johnny had just been kidnapped, pictures of several boys with their bodies and mouths tied were sent to the Noreen. These photos was not confirmed and made Noreen think that one of these boys was her son Johnny. The police investigation and the appearance of the matter indicated that was Johnny kidnapped by a pedophile human trafficking gang, a subject that was difficult and painful to even imagine. In the late 1980s, Lawrence E. Representative Paul Onaki made a major charge against King Jr., the director of the Franklin Credit Union. According to Onaki, Jr. was secretly managing a prostitution ring, a gang that used minors to make money. Onaki believed that Johnny Gosch was one of the victims of this underground gang. The story of Johnny Gosch has remained unsolved to this day, and there are many assumptions about it. Assumptions, some of which are related to a very powerful human traffic gang and also involve the political powers in this story. The stories in this video are just a few examples of incredible stories and strange and dark and mysterious stories that happened in real life, in reality. Stories that maybe you wouldn't believe if you hear it from a stranger or a detective or a police. Now tell me, what stories, what strange stories have you heard or experienced that are unbelievable but completely true?